Okay, today we're going to be looking at sort of the purposes of sentencing, goals of punishment, also looking specifically at the top end of the spectrum, at the death penalty. So some of the functions and goals of punishment, one of the oldest, not really supposed to be part of our system today, is retribution, sort of getting even. The next is incapacitation, which is we're really good at, but only while the people are in the facilities and only with respect to committing crimes outside the facilities. So inside of a prison, people still commit a lot of offenses while they are incapacitated there. Though it's much more difficult to commit crimes on the outside, they're not completely impossible. We also look at deterrence as a goal of punishment, trying to prevent future offending, either by the individual in terms of specific deterrence or the effect that it has on the general population, general deterrence. We also try to include as much rehabilitation as possible, although with reductions in prison education programs, licensing, and things like that, to have the individuals come out as like a certified mechanic or licensed welder. Those programs are cut fairly early when we're looking at ways to save money in a prison environment. Another one that is oftentimes underutilized is restoration of the victim, bringing the victim into the situation, doing cognitive therapy with the offender in some situations, or having discussions, dialogues over the course of the incarceration of the individual. Can sometimes be very effective in certain situations. The majority of the sentencing that we have is typically comes as sort of an indeterminate model where there is a range of how long a person can be incarcerated for. A lot of things can affect that. Overcrowding, the pandemic situation right now is certainly an issue, something that needs to be considered with respect to a lot of people's incarceration terms being ended early. When you have a more structured system, it's harder to roll with the punches that come up like this, or like the overcrowding, where you have much more structure. This person has to be incarcerated for this period of time, with some reduction for good behavior or other conditions of early release. But it's a lot more rigid, which is what they've tried to sort of get away from. The federal system works a little bit differently. There's not a parole system at the federal level, so the people that are sentenced to federal time typically do the majority of that time, less any time they get for good behavior, which, depending on the offense, could be very minimal. So the federal system operates a little bit differently than the state system in terms of how long they sentence people for, and the sort of uniformity that they strive for in their sentences. Some things that have come up over the course of the last few hundred years in terms of operating within the Constitution, two cases that look at what things can be considered in a sentencing phase. And the result of these two cases were that the only things that can be considered at a sentencing phase that might increase the punishment have to be brought before a jury. You can offer evidence of mitigation, so things that might lend themselves for a jury or for a judge to reduce the sentence, but if it is an aggravating factor, that has to be brought up at the trial phase before the jury. You can look up those cases on the OEA website, as you did with the police-related cases, at your leisure there. We also had 3 strikes laws come out where it doesn't matter what the third felony is. The third felony is third strike, and the individual is going to go to prison for a long time. We've also seen the increase in mandatory minimums, particularly with respect to drug-related offenses. Particularly non-violent drug-related offenses have a disproportional, extremely disproportional punishment in a lot of instances. Also, just the level. You basically, at the federal level for a trafficking charge, you have to have, if you're looking at crack cocaine, it's it lowered that, so it's I can't remember, so it used to be 5 grams of crack cocaine to 500 grams of powder cocaine. I think they lowered it to 50 grams of powder cocaine and 5 grams of crack um, to get a trafficking charge. It's like a 10-year sentence. There's some specificities that could affect that, but basically, you have to have this very small amount of crack, this relatively small amount of powder cocaine, or 100,000 kilograms of marijuana. So you basically have to have this much crack, this much cocaine, or a truckload of marijuana. So the sentencing, a lot of times, is not based on the way the drugs are sold, how the drugs are sold. A lot of it was just based on uh, early understandings, incomplete understandings of the drugs, incomplete understandings of why people sell drugs, how people sell drugs, because locking up a drug dealer doesn't remove a drug dealer from the streets. It creates a job opportunity for a new drug dealer. Some of the innovations in sentencing that we've seen, non-traditional sentences, so not putting people in incarceration, letting them serve time in the community, have betterment in the community, community service, or work to encourage restitution to the victims. Pre-sentence investigations have been pretty helpful, again, trying to offer some of those mitigating factors, giving the court a very complete image of who the offender is. And by doing that, lets the court apply the available punishments in a more tailored manner. We've also seen increased impacts of the crime victims themselves and Crime Victims' Rights Acts, giving them more access to knowledge about when parole hearings, things like that, or even the trial process is happening, and also being given the ability to offer impact statements. Again, so we're not looking at the cases where they were trying to bring in information that wasn't decided at the trial process, that was basically trying to add on hate crime amendment to a case during the sentencing phase, not dealing with it at the trial. The victim impact statements are something that are potentially aggravating or could be mitigating in certain instances towards the punishment. They're not things that are relevant at the trial for establishing guilt, but they are relevant in looking at the effect of what happened. And a common type of victim impact statement that is not relevant at a trial but is relevant at a sentencing is co-victims of homicide. So the people that are left behind when a homicide takes place, the parents of the individual or the victim might not have any relevant information in a trial process. But when we're looking at sentencing, it becomes more relevant. Just about every year we see about 1 million new convicted felons. About 40% of those go to prison. About 30% go to jail. So you see about 70% have incarceration of some kind. The average incarceration is under 5 years, where they spend about half that time inside of a correctional facility. We see just under, of the ones that are convicted, again, about 30% receive probation. They have probation time just over 3 years. The number one type of offense that lands people on probation and prison and in jails is drugs. A drug across the board. Every type of crime in the United States is going down, has been going down since the 1960s, except for drug crime. Now we're going to look at death penalty, some sort of the application of it, what it looks like today. This is a world map of countries that have death penalty and don't have death penalty. And as you see here, not to offend anyone from those countries, but that's not really the list of countries you want to be associated with. You don't want to be on human rights lists with China and Saudi Arabia and Iran, some of the countries in Western Africa, places that don't have the best human rights records. But that's where we find ourselves in terms of the United States in this debate. These are some legal histories of the death penalty cases. Review these. Again, just review the other cases. You can look these up if you want more specificity of these on OEA.org. But just sort of seeing the evolution of the case, specifically the Furman and the Gregg cases are very important. And then some of the later cases that restricted the application of the death penalty with regards to crimes that aren't involving death, and also the mental capacity of the offender, and also the age of the offender. So we see the death penalty still as a sentencing option in 28 states, so 3 have placed a moratorium on it. We'll see that in the next slide in the chart. But within those states that still sentence people to death, the frequency with which they do that, and also the frequency with which they carry out the executions, varies fairly widely. On the left side, you see the death row inmates by state. Sorry, that's the graph on the right side. On the left side, you see the states that still have it. But as you see, Oregon, Pennsylvania, California, it's still on the books to sentence people to the death penalty, but they don't actually execute anyone. Again, on the right side, you see the death row population by state, and sometimes there's conflict. In New Mexico, you see they have 2 inmates, but they don't have the death penalty. So as states remove that as an option, the sentence of those individuals is then commuted to typically life with parole or life without parole, depending on the state they're in, which is the same thing that happened to everyone that was on death row at the state level in 1972 when the Furman case came down. As you see, the death row population, again, we talked about the Furman case. The death row population almost bottomed out then. The only people that were on death row at that time were that were sentenced in the federal and military system. When the Gregg case happens, we see the moratorium lifted. The population increases fairly sharply until about the early 2000s, where it kind of levels off. And we've seen a little bit of a decline since then, as less states are having this as a sentencing option, and less individuals are brought before that punishment in the states that still do. We start to see the population decline. Again, this looks similar to the last chart in terms of the actual number of executions that have been carried out during this time period. Again, the moratorium was lifted in '76 for about the next 38 years, almost 40 years. We've seen it go up, peak with population size, and kind of level back out on the back end. It's also important to look at the exonerations that have taken place. This was as of about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. There were 142 exonerations that had taken place. That number is the number of new exonerations that are happening is going down. It's certainly not zero, which is where it should be in terms of not trying to sentence innocent people to death. But it is going down with our advancements in the trial process, with our understanding of forensic science, things like that. We've reduced the false conviction rate for these high-level offenses, and that's something I think deserves independent review. So each case could be reviewed. Each death penalty case could be reviewed by an independent federal arbiter, or independent federal judge, sort of federal court of execution appeals, to reduce the level of local bias that would be in some of these instances. Because you see, Florida, Illinois, Texas, there's a lot of exonerations that are happening there. So there's clearly something systemically wrong taking place in those areas that needs to be looked at and addressed if we are to continue using this type of punishment. We also see the executions cluster in particular areas. For the most part, you have a higher likelihood of being sentenced to the death penalty for a crime committed outside of an urban environment. The exception to that is basically Texas, Oklahoma, some in Missouri, and then Arizona, where you see these clusters around these urban environments. But in most other places, you have a higher likelihood of being executed for crimes committed in the rural areas as opposed to the cities. But you sort of see the political will of some of these areas, where Dallas is, where Houston is, in Texas, and then in Tulsa, Oklahoma City, St. Louis, Maricopa County, where Phoenix is. These places have seen a very high cluster of executions taking place. This last slide highlights one of the major issues with death penalties and the way that they're handled by the court system and the potential for institutional systemic bias. The major issue that the Supreme Court had with the death penalty in 1972 was that a black defendant was more likely to be executed for killing a white victim. And that's still the case today. You see the race of the victim overwhelmingly, definitely cases is white, whereas the race of the defendant, while the majority of the defendants are still white, black defendants are overrepresented. Also, again, when you look at the white defendant, black victim has a very low likelihood of being prosecuted as a death penalty case versus black defendant, white victim. The most damning aspect of this and the way the system handles these cases, I think, comes from the breakdown of who the prosecutors are in these cases. 98% of prosecutors in death penalty cases since 1976 have been white. 1% black, 1% Hispanic. So there is a vast overrepresentation in this particular type of prosecutor, and that even if you want to say that a black prosecutor would have made the same decisions, you don't know that. There are a lot of different types of opinions, perceptions people have, and they might have come to the same conclusion, but potentially the way they go about it is different, or some of the things they consider might be different, to avoid even the appearance of bias is not appropriate in these circumstances, and that is clearly there. Even if you're trying to say that the punishment is not being handed out with a racial bias, it looks like it is. And maybe if we try to address those optics, we can sort of by accident address some of the systematic issues that are there as well. Okay, so that's going to wrap up the court section. We'll move on next week into the correctional settings. Make sure you watch all the linked videos. I know there's a lot of them for this week. But make sure you watch the linked videos on the to-do sheet and the exam, assuming this is in that same semester that this is recorded. So if the to-do list says that your exam is this week, take your exam this week. If you're taking this in the summer of 2020, take your exam this week.